told my husband to man up about his anxiety. He disappeared and sent divorce papers my way. What good has anger and excessive desire ever done for a person in life? Looking back, I'm struggling to find any benefits my inconsiderate attitude and anger brought me. Instead, they've torn down my happiness. I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that my thoughtless words, uttered at the spur of the moment, have led to this outcome. You might be wondering what outcome I'm lamenting about so terribly. Well, it's a bit complicated, but the biggest of all is that I was serving papers in the end. Yes, divorce papers. That marked the end to my beautiful life and a stain on my most cherished memories. Memories that I was too blind to realize how precious they were. And right now, I feel it's too late to make up for anything. Doesn't divorce papers mean it's over and it can never be fixed? I don't know what to do anymore. I feel lost and consumed by this dark, overwhelming emotion, and the feeling is killing me. At first, I couldn't seem to understand why he was so upset, and I thought he was only just overreacting. But the moment I got the divorce papers, my eyes tore open, leaving me bare and shattered in my crumbled world. Why couldn't I understand him? Why did I let my anger and sensitivity get the best of me? What was so hard about being understanding and patient with him? I instead ended up using his pain against him here by hurting him even more. My name is Bianca. I'm 38 years old. I've been married to my husband Tony for 8 years now, and I must admit our marriage has been far from easy. When we first got married, we were like any other newlyweds, filled with love and dreams for our future, but then with time, things began to change. My husband was a surgeon, and I worked for a company. Tony was a hard worker and a supportive pillar to our family, and despite his demanding work and tight schedules, I could see he gave his best effort to always be there for us. He made sure to put my feelings first before anything and nothing mattered to him as much as me. He was the best, but I failed to reciprocate that love and care. Instead, I used his pain to hurt him even more. I'm consumed by guilt, knowing I couldn't be that same supportive partner for him. My husband had always been concerned about me working, especially during my pregnancy, but I insisted on continuing, saying my job was my top priority, and if he truly loved me, he'd understand and appreciate that. After much persuasion, he finally managed to get me to take a leave, which coincided with the arrival of our baby, Ivan, into our lives. At that time, I couldn't have asked for more. Ivan's birth was one of the best gifts we had both received in our marriage, and little did we know that it would also mark the beginning of our nightmare. It's true what they say. A perfect marriage can never be determined by age. If that were the case, considering my age, I would have made wiser decisions and avoided the mistakes I made that ultimately led to the mess I'm trapped in, and I'd still be with Tony right now. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when everything started to unravel, but I know it was years ago. I had become a different person, consumed by the ambitions of my career without even realizing it. It was the promotion season for our company, and I had become very occupied with work that I didn't know I was neglecting my child and husband. Nothing mattered to me so much at that time than earning the promotion that I so desired, and I was ready to do anything for it. I would always leave for work very early, leaving Tony to care for our child, Ivan, until the nanny arrived. Most times, this made him very late for work. I'd return home late, exhausted, but still focused on work. I was so engrossed with work that I forgot I was not only an employee, but also a wife and a mother. Tony, however, never complained. He tried to be understanding and patient with me, trying to make our family work despite my absence. The first time Tony complained was when our baby Ivan got into an accident due to his nanny's negligence. Tony tried to make me see my mistake, saying that while my work was important, I should also find it in me to squeeze a little of my time for him and our child. But I lashed out, telling him that taking care of Ivan wasn't just my responsibility, but his too. I accused him of thinking my work was easy and that he shouldn't think other people's work is not important. Looking back, I guess that incident was a wake-up call, a chance given to me to avert this situation I'm currently in, but I had taken what he said the wrong way, and now I feel I'm only paying the price for my foolish decisions. Despite my harsh words, my husband never held it against me and did his best to take care of our child and me, not until that day. A day that marked a turning point in our marriage, and I'd never forget. The fateful day tragedy struck, and doom decided to visit us and steal our source of joy, causing my world to shatter. We lost our precious Ivan, and in the most heartbreaking and senseless way. My baby Ivan was only around 4 years old when we lost him, and I can't believe that instead of finding the strength to be strong and rebuild our marriage, I let anger and blame consume me. I lashed out at Tony and blamed him for everything. In my grief, I was blind to Tony's pain, failing to acknowledge that he too had lost a child. I was so consumed by my own sorrow that I never stopped to consider his feelings. Why did I think I was the only one in pain? Tony's loss was just as devastating as mine, but I never gave him the space to grieve. He had lost a child too, but I had not stopped for once to consider his feelings, and I only thought about myself. That day, Tony was supposed to pick Ivan up from the daycare, but an emergency came up. He called me countless times, which is so painful to admit, but I was too caught up in celebrating my promotion with my colleagues to answer. I was savoring the moment, oblivious to Tony's urgent messages. It wasn't until later, when I finally checked my phone, that I saw his text messages and missed calls. So late, and it came along with the devastating news that shattered me forever. Tony called me back again after my team gathering, asking if I had picked Ivan up from the daycare. I was taken aback by his question, as driving Ivan to school and taking him home had always been done by him. I feel so ashamed of myself that I actually thought that way. I had yelled at him, telling him that was his responsibility, and I was so busy and had only got to see his message. We had not even finished arguing when he got another call and hung up. After a while, when I called Tony back, my world came crashing down. He told me that Ivan had been in an accident and had passed away, and my life was changed forever. My baby Ivan had gone out from the daycare personnel's care unnoticed and had been hit by a car while going after a ball. I fainted the moment I got the news, and when I woke up, I found myself in a hospital with Tony sobbing beside me. I sprang out of bed, grasping Tony's collar and demanding he bring our son back to me. I roared, saying I didn't care if he had to breathe life into him or exchange his life for my baby, but I needed my child back. Tony couldn't say or do anything but sob while trying his best to calm me down, but I was beyond consolation. I went crazy and unleashed my grief and anger on him, blaming him for Ivan's death. I blamed him for everything, and even went as far as saying that I would never forgive him, and everything that happened was his fault. Looking back at everything, I realize how cruel I was. Perhaps I was so terrified to accept that my boy was truly gone. I just couldn't bear the thought, and I didn't want to acknowledge the fact that our child was dead, and it was also my fault that happened. I guess it was just too much for me, and I needed to vent, and I saw Tony as a means for that. Despite everything, Tony sucked everything in. All my anger and outburst, he took in everything and never blamed me for anything. He tried his best to remain strong for us, and I guess that gave me the leverage to do everything I did. I withdrew from Tony, becoming increasingly distant. My focus shifted entirely to my work, and I evolved into a workaholic. Perhaps that's an understatement. I became addicted to work. Yes, addicted, because it was the only way I could escape my pain. Nothing else was important to me anymore. The only thing that had any value in my life was work. Not Tony, not our marriage, not even my well-being. I was so busy and consumed with my work to notice Tony was struggling with his health. After our son's passing, Tony took a year-long leave from work. I never bothered to know the reason why and was too caught up in my world. What if I had made a different choice back then? Would things be different now? Could I be able to stop my marriage from falling apart like now? My husband became a stranger to me, and despite his efforts to make things better between us, I was always the problem. I was always so cold and too busy to spend time with him. Things stayed that way between us for the years after that, and I had no idea Tony was struggling on his own until one night. I came home from work to find Tony cooking dinner as usual. As he chopped vegetables, he accidentally hurt his finger with the knife. I watched unmoved as he winced in pain. Then I lashed out, yelling at him, saying he was careless and could never do anything right. But then, Tony stood stunned and scared like he had just seen a ghost. The sight of his bleeding finger got him trembling, and he started sweating. I got so confused that I tried talking to him, but he wasn't responding. I could feel his heart beating so fast when I got closer to him, and his trembling got worse. He was sweating excessively, and before I realized it, he passed out. I immediately rushed him to the hospital, and that was how I found out he had an anxiety attack. The doctor told me he had been on medication for a while now, and that was just another episode, so he was going to be fine. Anyone would feel bad and worried to hear his or her loved one was ill, but I was different. After hearing about the details of his condition from the doctor and making sure his sickness wasn't deadly or contagious, I immediately left the hospital and hurried to work after getting a call from my boss. I came home later the next day, and Tony was already home. I asked him why he never told me about his condition, and he told me he didn't want me to worry, and I was just so busy, so he didn't want to add to it. He said he was going to be fine, and it wasn't anything serious. I should have pulled him into a hug and comforted him. He must have been so helpless and scared, but instead of hugging him and trying to make him feel better, I just ignored everything and went to bed claiming I was tired. As time passed, I witnessed Tony battling his anxiety attacks each time it happened. Most times, it often occurred when he returned from work or when our family visited, and at some point, instead of being supportive, I would always get upset and yell at him, telling him to face his fears and get over it. I would even go as far as accusing him of avoiding his problem, which was why he wasn't getting better. Even when Tony asked me to accompany him to see his therapist, I would always agree and then cancel at the last minute. When he brought it up again, I dismissed him, telling him I don't believe in therapy and it was just a waste of time. I'd claim that I had better and more important things to attend to in the office. Tony never complained, and I assumed everything was fine until about 2 weeks ago. My company hosted a party and I was asked to bring my husband with me. When we arrived, everything seemed to be going perfect, just like I needed until my boss approached us. He appreciated me and my husband, and also confessed he had been looking forward to that moment. He stated he had always wanted to meet me and Tony together to express his sympathy for the loss of our child. He had barely finished his words when suddenly Tony's anxiety struck. The partygoers were alarmed, and the whole party began to panic due to Tony's anxiety attack ruining the event and disrupting the celebration for everyone. After he took his medication and he finally regained his composure, I had excused the both of us and taken Tony outside. I just couldn't hold it in anymore, and I unleashed all 7 levels of hell on him. I screamed at Tony and told him how mortified he made me feel in front of everyone with the drama he displayed a few moments back. I went on saying he was an embarrassment to me, and he was such a weak and pathetic person. Tony's face reflected shock, disbelief, and anger. I could see the disappointment on his face, but that didn't stop me. I continued my verbal assault and told him that he should man up to his anxiety instead of letting his anxiety control him and dictate his life. I asked if he believed going for therapy sessions was going to cure him, and if he thought that was the case, that he was so naive and a big idiot to even think that way, so he should toughen up because he wasn't trying enough. Tony lost it. His anger boiled over, and he smashed his phone to the ground and started yelling with all his might. He apologized angrily and profusely for being weak, like I said, and also for the fact that he couldn't do anything for me rather than hurt me. He apologized for everything, and then he walked away like a lightning bolt. He disappeared, and that was the last time I saw him. I returned home after the party that night, but Tony was not there. He never came home. On a Sunday morning, I got a delivery, and when I opened it, there were divorce papers from Tony staring me right in my eyes. I was so stunned and speechless that I didn't know how to react. When did things get this messed up between us? Staring at the divorce papers in my hands that day, I suddenly felt a feeling of fear, and it felt like I was going to have a panic attack. I waited hoping Tony would show up, but he never showed up. It's as if he totally vanished or fell off the face of the earth. I don't know what else to do anymore. I already lost a child, and I'm so afraid I'd lose my husband too. I never intended to hurt him, but I guess I did. I don't know what do I do now, but most importantly, I don't know how I'll make up for everything. I want my husband back, but I have nowhere else to go or anyone to talk to, so I had to come out here and pour out everything. I don't care if you blame me or judge me because I have done that to myself 1,000,000 times already. What I need right now is a solution. I want to fix everything. Update. I've learned the hard way that some mistakes can never be undone. You can't truly understand or feel another person's pain unless you've experienced a similar depth of suffering or gotten to live that person's life during that moment. I can never really feel the exact amount of pain that Tony was going through and how much he endured during our time together, and it's clear that I was oblivious to his struggles. Looking back into his world these few days has made me realize how much of a demon I was. My husband was hurting, and I was just too self-absorbed and busy to notice that. Instead, I even went ahead and inflicted new injuries to his barely healed wounds, causing more stings to his already fragile heart. I can only imagine the pain and torture he must have been enduring during the time he was with me, and the weight of it is crushing me down. I'm such a selfish and undeserving person, and I accept that. I don't know how else I'm going to make up for everything. It's been a month since Tony disappeared, leaving me with divorce papers. I thought he was just angry and was going to come back home when everything cooled down between us, but I was wrong. His therapist visited me 3 days ago, and I have been consumed by tears since her visit. She came to check up on Tony because he had been absent from his treatment session, which was so unlike him. She confessed she was so pleased to finally meet me, and she had been wanting to speak to me for a while now, but I had been so busy, and it got to a point that Tony had decided not to bother me anymore, saying he would fight and recover on his own. She told me she had a lot to say to me, and I must admit she spilled just enough to drown me with guilt. She poured out a lot, and right now, I don't know how else to atone for everything. The therapist's words hit me like tons of bricks. Tony had developed his anxiety disorder briefly after our child's death. Hearing her say that, I felt like my nose had flattened on my face, sealing my nostrils, and I just couldn't breathe anymore. My husband had been battling his anxiety attack for almost 3 years, and I had only just found out about this barely 3 months ago. I felt like I'd been punched in the guts, unable to process the revelation. I was so flabbergasted, and I did not know how else to react. The therapist revealed that Tony blamed himself for the death of our child, Ivan, and he felt responsible that our marriage was about to fall apart. Tony's biggest fear was the thought of me abandoning him, especially after Ivan passed, and that was what triggered his anxiety. The therapist stated that she had encouraged Tony and requested countless times that he bring me with him to his therapy sessions, but he always refused and came alone, claiming he didn't want to trouble me with his condition. He believed I had no one else to lean on, and if I heard about his situation, he would seem weak to me, and I might not be able to cope with everything. He didn't want to become a burden to me or bury me with his struggle, so he decided to keep his treatment confidential. His words, as shared by the therapist, cut deep into my soul. The therapist went on saying that the day she learned I had found out about his condition, that she was thrilled. She stated she was happy, and she believed that I would serve as a support and an easier path to help him recover. But to her greatest disappointment, nothing changed. Each time he came for his treatment, he would always make up excuses for my absence until she had finally stopped asking, afraid she might add more pressure on him, which would not be good for his recovery. She told me how much I meant to Tony, and just how much guilt he felt knowing he could never bring our child back, and that thought made him feel worthless and helpless. The doctor went on to say that all those negative thoughts were one of the things that triggered anxiety attacks, and in Tony's case, if only I had given him even the slightest support, my husband would have gotten better with time. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me as the therapist spoke, and when she asked me if I had any idea on Tony's whereabouts, I just went blank and broke down in tears, crying and wailing. I felt like I was being stabbed. I could feel it, but I couldn't see the knife. I kept feeling the digs and cuts, and all I could do was shed tears as the pain coursed through my body deep into my soul. I told the doctor I had no idea where Tony left since our last fight, and I only received divorce papers from him. I had refused to sign it, waiting for him to show up, but after hearing everything now, I was certain it was over. I had no right to even hold on to him. I was never there for him. Back when he was struggling and throughout all the rough days, I was just a useless person and couldn't do anything to help him. I can't believe I called myself his wife, but I was even the main source of his pain. I was the reason he was sick, and I couldn't stop crying and blaming myself. The doctor concluded by saying she really couldn't blame him for disappearing and choosing divorce as his last resort, because with the way things were going, if he had still remained with me, his condition would have never improved, and I would only continue to hurt him. As if her words had not squashed me enough, she went on to unravel that when Tony found out there was a possibility anxiety disorders could be genetic, it made him so scared to even consider having another baby, since he was just so afraid to watch his baby suffer. He claimed it was only going to make things harder for me, and he wouldn't want that to happen. I could then understand why my sex life with Tony suddenly paused, and it only broke my heart more. The doctor concluded by saying I was everything to my husband, but it's just so sad he was so unlucky to have me as a wife. The therapist's last words still echo in my mind. Her statement haunts me, leaving me on the brink of madness. I'm consumed by grief, and I feel like I'm about to lose my mind. The work that seemed so important to me than anything now feels meaningless. I just lay at home crying and praying a miracle would just happen, and I'd see Tony again. But I feel unworthy of such a wish and opportunity. I felt so guilty that I had signed the divorce papers and sent it to our family lawyer. I don't even deserve to be called his wife, and the guilt of knowing I couldn't do anything for him weighs heavily on my conscience because I know I failed as Tony's wife. I was never there for him when he needed me the most. Now I'm trapped in our empty home, tormented by questions. Where did it all go wrong? How did everything get to this? Is there a way to change anything? Even if I can't change anything, I just want a chance to make things right for Tony. I know I don't deserve happiness, but I wish things could be different for Tony. I am really struggling, and nothing any of you have said on this platform has been useful. It has been nothing but insults and hateful comments, so I will take my leave. I am deleting this account because I cannot cope with everything. Emptiness and regret are my tormentors, haunting me every second of every day. I'm at the verge of losing my mind, but who can I blame? I know I messed up, and I ruined my life, and sadly my husband's as well. I wish I could apologize to Tony for everything, and if possible earn his forgiveness, even though I know I don't deserve it. I'm lost and unsure of how to move forward. If ever a thing like second chance exists, I'd be willing to give up anything, even my life, to earn it. I hope wherever Tony is, he will be happy and forget about a cruel person like me. Goodbye.